No one survives Voryn, but she had a baby, and he helped. Torrin Vask trudged through the ash drifts of Voryn Station 9, his boots crunching like he was walking on burnt toast. The air was a gritty soup, thick with volcanic dust that clung to his jumpsuit and stung his eyes despite the goggles. This place was a graveyard, a mining colony gutted when the geothermal grid went belly up 3 years ago. Corporate suits had yanked their funding faster than you could say profit margin, leaving the habitat modules to choke on ash storms. Torrin wasn't a hero, just a mechanic too stubborn to leave when the evacuation shuttles roared off. He'd stayed to keep the water purifiers humming for the stragglers, the ones nobody bothered to count. Now, he was the only idiot still patrolling this husk of a station, checking for leaks in systems nobody cared about. Another great day to be alive, he thought, or at least not dead yet. His wrist unit beeped, a faint pulse from the motion sensor clipped to his belt. Something alive, half a kilometer out in the middle of this ash-choked hell. Probably a scavenger bot gone haywire, he figured, but he adjusted his filtration mask and headed toward the signal anyway. Curiosity was a lousy reason to die, but boredom was worse. The wind howled, flinging ash against his goggles like a pissed-off sandblaster. He navigated by memory, weaving through the skeletal remains of cargo cranes and toppled storage pods. Voryn Station 9 wasn't built for beauty, just function, and now it wasn't even good for that. The signal led him to a wrecked trade shuttle, its hull split open like a cracked egg, half buried in a drift. He squinted through the haze. Something moved, not mechanical, organic. A figure crouched against the wreckage, curled tight, arms wrapped around a bundle. Torrin slowed, raising his hands to show they were empty, no weapons, just a guy with a bad life plan. The figure tensed, a hand clutching a jagged piece of hull metal, sharp enough to do damage if she wasn't picky about aim. She was Caliph, judging by the faint shimmer of her skin under the ash, silver-gray and tough as leather. Her eyes locked on him, not scared, not desperate, just ready to fight if he blinked wrong. The bundle in her arms shifted, a tiny movement, and Torrin's gut twisted. A kid, a baby, wrapped in a tattered cloak that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a storm. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low, steady, like he was talking to a skittish maintenance drone. "I've got a place, clean air, water, no strings." Her eyes narrowed, sizing him up like he was a faulty circuit. The baby made a weak sound, not a cry, just a rasp, and her grip on the metal tightened. Torrin didn't move closer. He'd seen that look before, the kind that said trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. He unclipped the spare filtration mask from his shoulder, held it out, slow, deliberate. "For the kid," he said. "It'll help her breathe." She didn't budge, just stared, her breath fogging the air in short, controlled bursts. The wind screamed, tossing ash against the wreckage, and the baby's rasp turned shallower. Torrin set the mask on the ground 3 meters away and backed up. "I'm not here to screw you over," he said. "Name's Torrin, I fix things, that's my whole deal." Her gaze flicked to the mask, then back to him. No words, just a calculation. Seconds dragged. Then she moved, not fast, not panicked, just precise. She scooped up the mask, fitted it over the baby's face, adjusting the straps with cracked, ash-caked fingers. The kid's breathing eased barely, but enough to notice. She looked at Torrin again, still clutching the metal shard. "Where's this place?" she asked, voice rough like she hadn't spoken in days. "Quarter-click east," he said. "Old Maintenance Bay. It's not a palace, but it's not this." He gestured at the wreckage. She didn't nod, didn't agree, just stood, cradling the baby tighter. "Lead," she said. Torrin turned, keeping his pace slow, letting her follow at her own distance. The ash storm clawed at them, but he knew the path, every dented panel and broken pipe. He didn't look back, didn't need to. He could hear her footsteps, light but steady, crunching behind him. The maintenance bay loomed ahead, a squat, reinforced box half buried in ash, its solar panels barely visible under the grime. Inside, the air was cleaner, filtered by a jury-rigged purifier that hummed like a drunk bumblebee. The space was a mess, tools scattered across a workbench, crates of salvaged parts stacked against the walls, a single cot shoved in the corner. No luxury, just survival. Torrin stepped aside, letting her enter, and sealed the door against the storm. She stopped just inside, eyes scanning the room, locking on the single exit, the lack of cameras, the absence of anything that screamed trap. The baby, still masked, stirred against her chest, a tiny hand twitching. Torrin moved to the purifier, checked its filter gauge. more to give her space than because it needed it. "Water's over there," he said, nodding at a stack of pouches on a shelf. Warm, not hot, safe for her. She didn't move for it, just stood back to the wall like she was ready to bolt. He didn't push. He'd been alone long enough to know what fear looked like, the kind that didn't shout, just waited for the other shoe to drop. He grabbed a wrench, started tinkering with a loose panel on the purifier, giving her time to decide he wasn't a monster. "You got a name?" he asked, looking up. Silence. "Then Silra," she said low like it cost her something. "And her?" He nodded at the baby. Silra's jaw tightened. "Not yet." Voryn didn't press. Caliph had their ways, probably some tradition about naming kids after they survived something like a storm or a moon phase. He wasn't an anthropologist, just a guy who kept the water flowing. "Fair enough," he said. "You need anything, it's there. I'm not gonna hover." He turned back to the panel, loosening a bolt, pretending it was urgent. Silra stayed by the wall, but her grip on the metal shard eased just a fraction. She moved to the shelf, slow, like she expected the floor to give out. She picked up a water pouch, tested it with a touch, then offered a few drops to the baby. The kid's lips moved, weak but alive, and Silra's shoulders sagged just enough to notice. Voryn kept his eyes on the wrench, but he saw it. Relief, raw and quiet. He'd seen it before, in the faces of workers he'd pulled from collapsed tunnels back when the station still had a pulse. "You always wander around picking up strays?" Silra asked, her voice sharp, testing. Voryn snorted. "Only when I'm bored, which is always." She didn't laugh, but her eyes softened just a hair. "Progress, maybe." He tightened the bolt, set the wrench down. "Storm's gonna rage for another day," he said. "You're stuck here unless you like eating ash." She didn't answer, just adjusted the baby's mask, her fingers steady despite the cracks in her skin. The purifier hummed, the only sound besides the muffled howl of the wind outside. Voryn didn't know her story, didn't need to yet. She was here, alive, and so was the kid. That was enough for now. He grabbed a stack of filter cloths from a crate, set them near her without a word. "For the kid," he said. "Or you. Whatever." She looked at them, then at him, like she was waiting for the catch. There wasn't one. He turned back to the workbench, started sorting through a pile of salvaged circuits. Busy work, but it gave her space. Silra wrapped the cloths around the baby, her movements careful, practiced, like someone who'd been doing everything alone for too long. The kid made a soft sound, not a cry, just a sign she was still in the game. Voryn kept his hands moving, but his mind was on her, on them. Voryn Station 9 was a dead end, a place where people like him ended up when they had nowhere else to go. But Silra and her kid, they weren't here by choice. Something had driven them out into that storm, something worse than ash. He didn't ask. If she wanted to tell him, she would. For now, he'd keep the purifier running, the air clean, and the questions to himself. The storm outside screamed on, but inside the bay was quiet, warm enough to keep the cold at bay, clean enough to keep the ash out. Silra stayed by the wall, the baby cradled close, her eyes still sharp but less like she was planning to stab him. Voryn figured that was a win. He wasn't here to save anyone, but he wasn't about to let them die either. Not on his watch. Not in his mess of a home. Silra stood just inside the maintenance bay, her back pressed to the wall like she was expecting a trap to spring. The air was clean, or at least cleaner than the ash soup outside, thanks to Voryn's cobbled-together purifier that sounded like it was gargling gravel. Voryn Station 9 glory days were long gone, and this bay was no penthouse, just a metal box stuffed with salvaged junk, a workbench drowning in tools, and a cot that looked like it had lost a fight with gravity. Voryn Vask, the guy who dragged her out of the storm, was poking at the purifier's control panel, pretending it needed his attention. Smart move, she thought. Give her space, don't crowd her, let her figure out if he was a creep or just weird. Her arms stayed tight around Lyrian, the baby's tiny chest rising easier under the filtration mask. The kid wasn't out of the woods, but she wasn't choking on ash anymore, and that was a win Silra hadn't expected today. Voryn nodded toward a shelf stacked with water pouches, their surfaces beaded with condensation. "Water's there," he said, voice steady like he was offering her a wrench instead of a lifeline. Warm, not hot, safe for her. Silra's eyes flicked to the pouches, then back to him. No sudden moves, no looming, just a guy in a patched jumpsuit with ash still clinging to his boots. She didn't trust him, not yet, but Lyrian's raspy breaths were getting steadier, and that was enough to keep her from bolting. She edged toward the shelf, keeping the wall at her back, her free hand still gripping the jagged hull fragment she'd carried in. The bay was a mess, but a deliberate one, like Toryn knew where every bolt and wire was, even if it looked like chaos. No cameras, no weapons, just one exit sealed against the storm. She grabbed a pouch, tested it with a squeeze, warm but not scalding, just like he said. She dripped a few drops onto her finger, then touched them to Lyrian's lips. The baby stirred, her mouth moving weakly and Silra's chest unclenched, just a fraction. She wasn't going to cry, not here, not in front of some stranger who could still turn out to be trouble. Toryn kept his eyes on the purifier, fiddling with a dial that probably didn't need fiddling. "You can sit if you want," he said, not looking up. "Cot's not great, but it beats the floor." Silra stayed where she was, wall at her back, Lyrian cradled close. Sitting felt like admitting she was staying, and she wasn't ready for that. "You live like this?" she asked, her voice sharp, testing him again. Toryn snorted, a sound halfway between a laugh and a grunt. "Yeah, welcome to my 5-star resort. No room service, but the ash is free." She didn't smile, but her grip on the metal shard eased just a bit. He wasn't pushy, wasn't trying to sell her on anything, and that was weirdly disarming. Most people on Voryn who offered help wanted something, usually something she wasn't willing to give. She scanned the bay again, taking in the details, the crates of scavenged parts, the solar panel rigged to a flickering light strip, the faint hum of the purifier keeping the air breathable. It wasn't safe, not really, but it was better than the wreckage outside, where Lyrian had been one bad gust away from giving up. Toryn stepped away from the purifier, grabbed a stack of filter cloths from a crate and set them on the floor a meter from her. "For her," he said. "Or you, they're clean, mostly." Silra's eyes narrowed. Free stuff always came with a catch, but his hands were empty, his posture loose, like he didn't care if she took them or not. She crouched, still clutching Lyrian, and dragged the cloths closer with her free hand. They were rough, patched but dry, better than the tattered cloak barely keeping her kid warm. She wrapped one around Lyrian, careful not to jostle the mask, and the baby made a soft sound, not a cry, just a sign she was still fighting. Silra's throat tightened, but she swallowed it down. No time for that. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice low, like she was daring him to lie. Toryn leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "Same reason as anyone, nowhere else to go. Used to fix purifiers for the mining crews, then the crews left and I didn't." He shrugged, like it was no big deal, but his eyes had that look, the kind that said he'd seen things he didn't talk about. Silra knew that look. She'd seen it in the mirror back when mirrors were a thing she had access to. "You didn't evacuate?" she pressed. "Nope. Someone had to keep the water flowing for the stragglers. Guess I got used to the quiet." He paused, then added, "You don't have to tell me your deal. Just saying this place holds air. You're welcome to it." Silra didn't answer. She adjusted the cloth around Lyrian, her fingers brushing the baby's cheek, still too pale but warmer now. The Caliph had a saying, "Trust is a debt you pay with blood," and she'd paid enough already. Her partner Voryn had died in a pirate raid, his body left in the ash while she ran, pregnant and bleeding. Voryn didn't care about unregistered Caliph, didn't care about her or the kid she'd birthed in a burned-out cargo pod. She'd been invisible since, scavenging, dodging storms, until the ash had finally won. Until now. Toryn moved to the workbench, picking up a circuit board that looked like it had been through a shredder. He poked at it, not because it needed poking, but because it gave her room to breathe. "Storm's got another 12 hours, he said. "You're stuck here unless you've got a death wish." Silra's jaw tightened. She didn't like being stuck anywhere, but Lyrian's breathing was steady now, the mask humming softly against her tiny face. She set the metal shard down, not out of trust, but because her arm was tired and she needed both hands to adjust the cloths. Toryn noticed but didn't comment. Good. She wasn't here for his approval. "You do this a lot?" she asked, her tone sharp again. "Pick up random people in storms?" Toryn grinned, a quick flash that didn't reach his eyes. "Only when I'm feeling extra stupid. So yeah, maybe once a year." She didn't laugh, but her shoulders loosened just enough to notice. He wasn't trying to charm her, wasn't trying to sell her on some savior routine. That was something. She dripped more water onto Lyrian's lips, watching the baby's mouth move, slow but deliberate. Her chest ached, not from the ash but from the weight of almost losing her. She'd been out there in that wreckage, ready to let go, humming a Caliph dirge to keep herself sane. And then this guy showed up with his dumb mask and his dumb shelter, and now she was here, not dead, not yet. Toryn set the circuit board down, grabbed a water pouch for himself and took a sip. "You don't have to stand there all night," he said. "All's not going anywhere." Silra's eyes flicked to the cot, then back to him. Sitting meant staying, and staying meant risk. But Lyrian needed warmth, needed air, and this place had both. She slid down the wall, slow, keeping the baby close, and sat cross-legged on the floor. The metal was cold through her cloak, but the air was clean, and that was enough for now. Voryn didn't watch, just went back to his circuit board, muttering something about stupid wiring under his breath. Silra studied him. The way his hands moved, precise but not fussy, like someone who'd fixed things until it was all he knew. The bay hummed around them, the purifier's drone mixing with the muffled scream of the storm outside. Lyrian shifted, her tiny hand curling around Silra's finger, and for the first time in days, Silra let herself breathe, really breathe. Not safe, not yet, but not dead either. She'd take it. Silra sat cross-legged on the floor of Voryn's maintenance bay, her back still closed to the wall but not quite kissing it anymore. Lyrian slept in her arms, the filtration mask humming softly, keeping the baby's breath steady. The air in the bay was clean, or as clean as you could get on Voryn Station 9, where the volcanic ash outside turned everything into a gritty nightmare. Voryn was at his workbench, elbow-deep in a tangle of wires that looked like they'd been chewed up by a drunk robot. He wasn't ignoring her, just giving her space, which was smart. Silra didn't trust people who tried too hard to be friendly. They usually wanted something, and she'd learned the hard way what that could mean. The purifier's low drone filled the silence, a comforting buzz that said the ash wasn't getting in, at least not yet. She adjusted Lyrian's cloth wrap, her fingers brushing the baby's cheek, warmer now, less like a ghost. She hadn't expected to make it this far, not after the wreckage, not after the storm. Voryn's voice cut through her thoughts, low, not pushy. "You don't have to talk," he said, still focused on the wires. "But if you want to, I'm not deaf." Silra's eyes flicked to him, sizing up the offer. He wasn't looking at her, just twisting a connector with a pair of pliers like her answer didn't matter. That was new. Most people on Voryn who asked questions wanted leverage, a way to make you owe them. She shifted, settling Lyrian closer, and spoke, her voice rough from disuse. "I'm Caliph, trade caravan. We came here 2 years ago, me and Voryn, my partner. Pirates hit us last season. He didn't make it." She stopped, waiting for the inevitable follow-up, the pity or the probe. Voryn just nodded, still working the wires. "That's rough," he said. "Pirates don't exactly send condolences." Silra's jaw tightened, but she kept going. "They burned our skiff, took everything. I was pregnant. Nobody in the station cared. Unregistered Caliph don't get rations, don't get shelter. I've been dodging storms since." Her voice was flat, like she was reading a cargo manifest, but her fingers trembled slightly on Lyrian's wrap. Voryn set the pliers down, leaned back against the workbench. "Yeah, Voryn's got a real knack for forgetting people," he said. "I stayed after the evac to keep the purifiers running for the stragglers. Most of them didn't make it either." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. The silence stretched, not tense, just heavy, like they were both carrying the same kind of ghosts. Silra studied him, the way his hands moved, steady but scarred, like he'd been fighting machines longer than he'd been fighting loneliness. "Why'd you stay?" she asked, her tone sharp, testing again. Voryn snorted, a dry sound. "Stupid, mostly. Thought I could keep things running, maybe help a few folks. Turns out I'm not great at the hero thing. Better at fixing pipes." He glanced at her just for a second, then back to the wires. "You don't have to tell me more. Just saying I get it. This place chews people up." Silra didn't respond, just adjusted Lyrian's mask, her mind replaying the raid, Vren's hand reaching for her through the smoke, the way the ash swallowed him. She'd run, bleeding, with nothing but the cloak she'd worn for their bonding ceremony. Now it was just her and Lyrian, and this guy who didn't seem to want anything. That was the part that didn't add up. Nobody gave away clean air and water for free, not on Voryn. A sharp beep from the console in the corner snapped her out of it. Voryn was on his feet in a second, crossing the bay to check the screen. His shoulders tensed, and Silra's hand instinctively went for the hull fragment she'd set down. "Problem?" she asked, her voice low, ready to move. Voryn tapped the console, his fingers flying over the controls. "Pirate scanner," he said. "Caught a spike in our water usage. Not a full sweep, just a ping, but they are sniffing." Silra's stomach twisted. She'd seen what pirates did to unregistered stragglers, and it wasn't pretty. "They coming?" she asked. "Not yet," Voryn said, still tapping. "I can reroute the data, make it look like a glitch from an old pump station. Buy us some time." He glanced at her, his eyes steady but tired. You okay with me messing with their system? It's not exactly legal. Silra almost laughed a dry huff. Legal's not my problem, getting caught is. Torrin grinned, quick and sharp, like he appreciated the honesty. Fair enough, hang tight. He worked fast, rerouting the purifier's data through a dead relay in a neighboring sector. Silra watched, her arms still around Lyrian, calculating. This guy knew how to hide, knew how to game the system. That meant he'd done it before, which meant he wasn't just some mechanic with a bleeding heart. You've hidden people before, she said, not a question. Torrin didn't look up, just kept typing. Couple times. Workers mostly. Station didn't care about them either. Taught him how to mask their heat signatures, sent him off to better odds. He paused, then added, didn't always work. Voryn's not kind to strays. Silra nodded, her eyes on Lyrian's tiny chest, rising and falling under the mask. She didn't ask what happened to the others. She didn't need to. The ash outside told enough stories. Torrin finished, the console's beep fading into a low hum. We're good for now, he said. Scanners looking at a ghost signal in Sector 4. Won't hold forever, but it'll do. Silra's grip on Lyrian eased just a fraction. You didn't have to do that, she said. Risk your setup for us. Torrin shrugged, leaning back against the console. Yeah, well, I'm not a fan of pirates or letting kids choke on ash. Pick your poison. His tone was light, but his eyes weren't, and Silra caught it, the flicker of someone who'd seen too much to pretend everything was fine. She didn't trust him, not fully, but he wasn't acting like he wanted her to owe him, and that was something. She shifted, setting Lyrian down on a folded cloth near the purifier, where the air was warmest. The baby stirred, her tiny hand twitching, and Silra's chest ached again, not from fear this time, but from the weight of almost losing her. She'd been ready to give up out there in that wreckage, humming to keep herself from breaking. And then Torrin showed up, with his stupid mask and his stupid bay, and now they were here breathing. She didn't know what to do with that. Torrin moved back to the workbench, picking up the wires again, giving her space. You don't have to stay glued to the wall, he said, not looking up. Floor's cold, but it's not gonna bite. Silra's lips twitched, not a smile, but close. I'll manage, she said. She stayed where she was, but her shoulders loosened just enough to notice. The purifier hummed. The storm howled outside, muffled by the bay's walls, and Lyrian slept, her breath steady now. Silra watched Torrin work, his hands moving with the kind of ease that came from years of fixing things that didn't want to be fixed. He wasn't a savior, wasn't a threat, just a guy who decided not to let them die. For now, that was enough. She leaned her head back against the wall, her eyes half closed, not relaxed but not on edge either. The ash was outside. The pirates were blind and Lyrian was alive. She'd take it, one breath at a time. Silra crouched near a vent in Torrin's maintenance bay, her fingers wrapped around a salvaged welding torch that looked like it had been retired before she was born. The vent was a mess, clogged with ash that had snuck through a hairline crack, threatening to choke the purifier's airflow. Voryn Station 9 didn't give a damn about their survival, but Silra wasn't about to let a lousy vent win. Lyrian was curled up nearby, wrapped in a pile of filter cloths, her tiny chest rising steadily under the filtration mask. The kid was tougher than she looked, hanging on through days of ash and starvation, and Silra wasn't going to let her down now. Torrin was across the bay, tinkering with a water pump's pressure valve, his hands moving with the kind of autopilot precision you get from fixing the same junk for years. He hadn't said much since the pirate scanner scare, just kept the systems running and the air clean. Silra appreciated that. Words were cheap on Voryn, and she'd had enough of empty promises from caravan bosses and station clerks. She adjusted the torch, the flame spitting a weak blue flicker, and started sealing the vent's crack, her hands steady despite the burns scarring her forearms. She'd learned to weld back on the Caliph trade skiffs, patching hulls between star systems, and this was no different, just smaller, dirtier, and with higher stakes. The bay's hum filled the air, the purifier's drone mixing with the faint howl of the storm outside, now fading into a grumpy murmur. Torrin glanced over, his eyes catching the torch's glow. You sure you know what you're doing with that thing? He asked, his tone light like he was half joking, half checking she wasn't about to set his bay on fire. Silra didn't look up, just kept the flame steady. Better than you do with it, she said, her voice dry but not hostile. This torch is garbage, though. You ever clean your tools? Torrin snorted, a sound that was almost a laugh. That torch has character. It's been with me longer than most people. Silra's lips twitched, not a smile, but close. She finished the weld, a clean line that wouldn't win awards but would keep the ash out. She switched off the torch, set it down, and tested the vent with a finger. No airflow, no leaks. Good enough. She leaned back, wiping sweat from her brow, her silver-gray Caliph skin catching the bay's dim light. Lyrian stirred, letting out a soft coo, and Silra's chest unclenched just a bit. The kid was getting stronger, her breath less labored, her eyes starting to track the purifier's faint glow. Torryn set his wrench down, crossed the bay, and handed her a pair of pliers from his workbench. "For the next one," he said, nodding at the vent. "Unless you're planning to melt my wall." Silra took the pliers, her fingers brushing his, no flinch, no hesitation. That was new. A week ago she'd have kept her distance, ready to grab Lyrian and run. Now, she was welding his vents and he was handing her tools like they were a team. Weird didn't cover it. "You always this generous with your junk?" she asked, her tone sharp but playful, testing the waters. Torryn grinned, quick and crooked. "Only when I'm trying to impress someone. So yeah, never." Silra huffed, almost a laugh, and went back to inspecting the vent. The bay felt smaller now, not cramped, just lived in, like they were carving out a corner of Voryn that wasn't trying to kill them. Torryn returned to his pump, muttering something about pressure seals, but she caught him glancing her way, not staring, just checking. She didn't mind. He wasn't looking for weakness, just making sure she was still there. They worked in silence for a while, the kind that wasn't awkward, just functional, like two gears clicking into place. Silra finished reinforcing the vent, then moved to Lyrian, adjusting the cloths to keep her warm. The baby's tiny hand grabbed her finger, weak but stubborn, and Silra's throat tightened. She'd almost lost her out there in that wrecked shuttle with nothing but ash and a dying song. Now they were here breathing because of a guy who didn't seem to want anything but to keep his machines running. Torryn broke the silence, his voice casual but deliberate. "You're good with that torch. Where'd you learn?" Silra didn't look up, just kept smoothing Lyrian's wrap. "Trade skiffs. You don't get far in a caravan without fixing your own hull. Vren taught me the basics, then I taught myself the rest." She paused, the name heavy on her tongue. "He was better at it." Torryn nodded, not pushing, just letting the words sit. "Sounds like he was solid," he said. "Yeah," Silra said, her voice softer now. "He was." She didn't elaborate and he didn't ask. The bay's hum took over again, a steady pulse that felt like a heartbeat. Torryn set his tools down, grabbed 2 protein packets from a crate and tossed one to her. "Dinner," he said. "Tastes like regret, but it's food." Silra caught it, her reflexes sharp despite the exhaustion. She ripped it open, sniffed it, and grimaced. "You eat this every day?" she asked. "You get used to it," Torryn said, already chewing his own. "Or you go insane. Either way, you're not hungry." She took a bite, wincing at the chalky texture, but it was calories and Lyrian needed her to keep going. They ate in silence, sitting closer than they had before, not across the bay but near the purifier, where the air was warmest. Lyrian babbled softly, her first real sound in days, and Silra's eyes stung, but she blinked it away. Torryn noticed, didn't comment. He just leaned back, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "Kid's got a voice," he said. "She's gonna be trouble." Silra's lips curved, a real smile this time, small but there. "She already is," she said. She looked at him, really looked, taking in the lines on his face, the ash still caught in his hair, the way he didn't fill the silence with useless chatter. He wasn't Vren, wasn't trying to be, but he was here and that was starting to matter. The storm outside had weakened, a low grumble now, not a scream. Torryn checked the console, his fingers tapping a quick rhythm. "No pings from the pirates," he said. "Guess they're too busy robbing someone else." Silra nodded, her eyes on Lyrian, who was trying to grab the edge of her wrap. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. "Probably," Torryn said, honest but not grim. "But I've got tricks. We'll be fine for now." "We," she noted, "not you, not me, but we." It felt strange, like a gear she hadn't known was missing. She didn't trust it, not fully, but she didn't hate it either. She finished the protein packet, set it aside, and picked up the pliers, turning them over in her hand. "You need another vent patched?" she asked. Torryn raised an eyebrow, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "You volunteering to fix my whole bay, because I've got a list." Silra shrugged, her tone matching his. "I'm not here to sit pretty, give me the list." He laughed, a short, real sound, and for a moment the bay didn't feel like a bunker on a dead station. It felt like a place where people could live, not just survive. Torryn pulled a cracked data pad from the workbench, started scrolling through maintenance logs. "All right, Caliph, you asked for it," he said. "But don't blame me when you're cursing my tools." Silra didn't answer, just picked up the torch again, her hands already moving. Lyrian babbled again, louder this time. and Silra's heart did something she hadn't felt in months, something like hope. The ash was still out there. The pirates were still sniffing, but in here they were breathing, working, living. For now, that was enough. Silra leaned against the wall of Torrhen's maintenance bay, her arms crossed, watching Lyrian wiggle on a pile of filter cloths near the purifier. The kid was getting feisty, her tiny hands swatting at the air like she was picking a fight with the hum of the machine. Voryn Station, 9 ash storms had quieted for now, leaving the bay's air clean, or at least clean enough that Silra didn't feel like she was breathing gravel. Torrhen was at his workbench, hunched over a cracked data pad, muttering curses at a relay schematic that looked like it had been drawn by a drunk toddler. He'd been at it for an hour, ever since the console had pinged with a new alert, a pirate scanner sniffing their water usage again. Silra didn't like it. Pirates didn't ping twice unless they smelled blood, and on Voryn, blood usually meant resources worth stealing. She shifted her weight, her silver-gray Caliph skin catching the bay's dim light, and kept her eyes on Torrhen's hands, steady despite his grumbling. He wasn't panicking, which was good, because if he panicked, she'd grab Lyrian and bolt, clean air or not. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice low, sharp, like she was testing a blade. Torrhen didn't look up, just kept tapping the pad. "Bad enough they noticed us, not bad enough they're knocking yet," he said. "Scanner's asking for a resource log, probably automated, but if we don't answer, it'll flag us for a manual sweep." Silra's jaw tightened. She'd seen what happened when pirates swept a station, bodies left in the ash, gear stripped down to bolts. "And if we answer," she pressed. Torrhen glanced at her, his eyes tired but sharp. "We fake it. I can spoof a trade caravan manifest, list you and the kid as crew. Makes our water draw look legit, like we're just passing through." Silra's arms uncrossed, her fingers twitching like she wanted to grab something, anything to feel in control. "That's a big lie," she said. "If they dig, they'll know we're not a caravan." Torrhen nodded, setting the pad down. "Yeah, and if they dig, we're screwed either way. But this buys time, maybe enough to figure out our next move." He leaned back, rubbing his neck. "You in?" Silra's eyes flicked to Lyrian, who was now chewing on a cloth, oblivious to the fact that their lives were one bad scan away from ending. She'd survived a pirate raid, ash storms, and days without food, all before she had a name. Silra wasn't about to let a scanner win now. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Torrhen's mouth quirked, not a smile, but close. "You know caravan codes, signal formats, anything like that?" Silra nodded, slow. "I ran comms for our skiff. Vren handled navigation, I handled the chatter. I can fake a manifest, but it won't hold up under a deep probe." Torrhen stood, crossing to the console. "Good. We don't need deep, just convincing enough to bore them. Pirates are lazy. They'll move on if it looks like paperwork." Silra snorted, a dry sound. "You're betting our lives on pirate bureaucracy." Torrhen grinned, quick and sharp. "Best bet I've got, you got a better one." She didn't, and he knew it. She moved to the console, standing close enough to see the screen but far enough to keep Lyrian in her peripheral vision. The display showed a blinking alert, a string of code demanding usage logs. Torrhen pulled up a blank manifest template, a relic from Voryn's trading days, and started filling it in. Silra leaned in, her shoulder brushing his. No flinch, no pullback. That was new. A week ago she'd have kept a meter between them, ready to grab her kid and run. Now they were hacking pirate systems together like some kind of ash-soaked crime duo. "Ship name," Torrhen said, fingers poised. "Caliph Dawn," Silra said, the name slipping out before she could stop it. It was her old skiff, Vren's pride, burned to slag in the raid. Torrhen typed it in, no questions, just a glance that said he got it. They worked fast, Silra feeding him codes, call signs, cargo details, anything to make the manifest look lived in. She listed Lyrian as crew-dependent medical priority, a half-truth that twisted her gut but might keep the scanners off their backs. Torrhen wove in fake maintenance logs, claiming the bay's water draw was for a busted coolant system, not 3 people trying to stay alive. The console hummed, processing their lies, and Silra's heart pounded, not from fear but from the rush of doing something, anything to fight back. "You're good at this," Torrhen said, his voice low, almost impressed. Silra shrugged, keeping her eyes on the screen. "Had to be. Caravan life doesn't give you room for mistakes." She paused, then added, "You're not bad yourself. Where'd you learn to hack relays?" Torrhen's grin faded just a bit. "Taught a worker how to mask her signal a while back. She was hiding from a deck crew. Didn't want her found." He didn't say if she made it, and Silra didn't ask. Voryn wasn't kind to happy endings. The console beeped, the manifest uploaded, routed through a dead relay to make it look like it came from a passing ship. Torrin leaned back, exhaling. "Now we wait," he said. "If they buy it, we're good for a week. If not, we'll know soon." Silra's fingers curled, her nails digging into her palms. Waiting wasn't her style, but running wasn't an option, not with Lyrian barely strong enough to crawl. She moved to the kid, kneeling to adjust the mask, hands steady despite the knot in her chest. Lyrian grabbed her finger, squeezing with surprising force, and Silra's throat tightened. "You're gonna be a pain when you're older," she muttered, her voice soft, almost fond. Torrin watched from the console, his expression unreadable. "She's got your fight," he said. Silra glanced at him, caught off guard. "Hope not," she said. "Fighting's overrated." Torrin snorted a dry laugh. "Tell that to the Ash out there, or the pirates." He stood, grabbing a water pouch from the shelf and tossing it to her. "Drink. You're no good to her if you pass out." Silra caught it, her reflexes sharp, and took a sip, the warm liquid easing the grit in her throat. She handed it back and their fingers brushed, no tension, just a moment that felt normal, or as normal as things got on Voryn. She sat near Lyrian, watching the kid's tiny chest rise and fall, and let herself breathe, really breathe, for the first time in hours. Torrin moved to the purifier, checking its filters, busy work to kill time while the scanner's response loomed. "You ever think about leaving?" Silra asked, her voice low, like she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. Torrin paused, his hand on a filter. "Every day," he said. "But then I'd have to find another hellhole to fix. This one's got my name on it." Silra's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You're weird, Torrin," he grinned, quick and crooked. "Says the woman welding vents in my bay. We're both weird." She didn't argue, just leaned back against the wall, her eyes on Lyrian. The console stayed quiet, no angry beeps, no pirate demands. Maybe they'd bought the lie, maybe not. Either way, they were still here, still breathing. Silra's hand drifted to her wrist, her fingers tracing a Caliph gesture, palm to pulse, a sign of trust she hadn't used since Vren. She looked at Torrin, caught him watching, and held his gaze. "Show me that," he said, nodding at her hand. She hesitated, then did it again, slower. "Means you're not a liar," she said, "or you're worth betting on." Torrin copied it, clumsy but earnest, his palm pressing his wrist. "Good enough?" he asked. Silra's eyes softened, just a hair. "Close," she said. The bay hummed around them, the purifiers drone a steady pulse, the storm outside a distant grumble. Lyrian kicked at her cloths, letting out a soft coo, and Silra's heart did something it hadn't in months, something like hope. They weren't safe, not yet, but they were fighting together, and that was more than she'd had in a long time. Torrin went back to the purifier, muttering about filter clogs, but his eyes flicked to her, quick, like he was checking she was still there. She was. For now, she was. Silra sat cross-legged on the floor of Torrin's maintenance bay, her back to the wall, watching Lyrian squirm on a nest of filter cloths near the purifier. The kid was getting bold, her tiny arms flailing like she was trying to wrestle the air itself. Voryn Station, 9 ash storms had gone quiet for a couple of days, leaving the bay's air clean enough that Silra could almost forget the grit that used to coat her throat. The purifier hummed steady, a low buzz that felt like the bay's heartbeat, keeping them alive in this ash-choked graveyard of a station. Torrin was at his workbench, fiddling with a pressure valve that didn't need fiddling, his hands moving more out of habit than necessity. He'd been like that since the pirate scanner bought their fake manifest, giving them a week's breathing room before the next ping. Silra didn't trust the quiet, but she wasn't running yet, not with Lyrian finally looking less like a ghost and more like a kid. The bay felt smaller now, not cramped, just lived in, like they'd carved out a corner of Voryn that wasn't trying to kill them. Silra's eyes flicked to the console, its screen dark, no angry beeps from pirate scanners. She adjusted Lyrian's cloth wrap, her fingers brushing the baby's cheek, warm and soft, a far cry from the pale, raspy thing she'd been in that wrecked shuttle. The kid was tough, Caliph tough, and Silra's chest ached with something she hadn't let herself feel in months, pride, maybe, or relief. Torrin glanced over, catching her look. "She's got your eyes," he said, his voice low, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to say it. Silra's lips twitched, not a smile, but close. "Hope not," she said. "Mine see too much trouble." Torrin snorted, setting the valve down. "Trouble's her birthright out here. She'll manage." Silra didn't argue, just smoothed Lyrian's wrap, her hand steady despite the weight of the past week. They'd dodged a pirate scan, faked a caravan manifest, and kept the purifier running, all while Lyrian got stronger, her coups louder, her kicks fiercer. Silra had started to think they might make it, not forever, but long enough to matter. She looked up, catching Toryn watching her, his eyes tired but warm like he saw her, not just the Caliph refugee with a kid and a chip on her shoulder. "You ever name someone?" she asked, her voice soft, testing. Toryn leaned back, crossing his arms. "Not unless you count a water pump I called piece of junk for a year," he said. "Why? Kid ready for one?" Silra nodded, slow, her eyes on Lyrian. "Caliph don't name until the first eclipse after birth. Means the kid's earned it, survived the dark. Station logs say one hit last night." Torrens' eyebrows lifted, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "So what's the pick?" Silra hesitated, her fingers tracing Lyrian's tiny hand, curled tight around her thumb. Naming was heavy, a Caliph thing that tied you to the stars, to the people who came before. Voryn should have been here for it, but Voryn was ash now and Silra was all Lyrian had. "Lyrian," she said, the word soft like a breath, "means light after shadow." Torrens' mouth quirked, a real smile this time. "Fits her," he said. "She's already brighter than this dump." Silra's throat tightened, but she swallowed it down, keeping her eyes on the kid. Lyrian kicked at her cloths, letting out a sharp coo like she approved. Silra's lips curved, a small, real smile, the kind she hadn't worn since the caravan days. She looked at Toryn, caught him watching again, and didn't look away. "You got a story like that?" she asked. "Something you carry from before?" Torryn's smile faded just a bit, his eyes distant for a second. "Not much," he said. "Grew up on a freighter fixing engines before I could read. Stayed here when the station went bust because I didn't know where else to go. Helped a few folks along the way, like a worker named Kess. She was hiding from a deck crew, same as you with the pirates. Taught her how to spoof a heat sig, got her off-world." He paused, his voice lower. "Hope she made it." Silra nodded, not pressing. Voryn didn't hand out happy endings, and Torrens' voice said he knew it. She shifted, setting Lyrian down gently, making sure the cloths kept her warm. The bay's hum filled the silence, steady, like a promise they were both starting to believe in. Torryn moved to the purifier, checking its gauges, busy work to give her space. "You don't have to stay glued to the floor," he said, not looking up. "Cot's free if you want it." Silra's eyes flicked to the cot, then back to him. "I'm good," she said, but her voice was softer now, less guarded. She leaned back against the wall, her shoulders loosening just enough to notice. Torryn didn't push, just kept poking at the purifier, muttering something about filter clogs. Silra watched him. The way his hands moved, precise but scarred. Like he'd been fighting machines longer than he'd been fighting loneliness. He wasn't Voryn, wasn't trying to be, but he was here, and that was starting to mean something. She reached for a water pouch, took a sip, then tossed it to him. "Don't dehydrate," she said, her tone dry but playful. Torryn caught it, grinning. "Yes, ma'am," he said, taking a swig. "You always this bossy." Silra's lips twitched again. "Only when I'm stuck with someone who forgets to drink." Torryn laughed, a short, real sound, and for a moment, the bay didn't feel like a bunker on a dead station. It felt like a place where people could breathe, maybe even live. Silra's eyes drifted to Lyrian, who was now gnawing on a cloth, her tiny face scrunched in determination. "She's gonna be trouble," Silra said, almost to herself. Torryn leaned against the workbench, watching them both. "Good kind of trouble," he said. "The kind that keeps you sharp." Silra didn't answer, just kept her eyes on Lyrian, her heart doing that thing again, something like hope. The console stayed quiet, no pirate pings, no angry alerts. The manifest had held for now, and they were still here, still fighting. She thought about Kess, the worker Torryn had helped, and wondered if she'd found a place like this, a corner of the universe that didn't want to kill her. Silra hoped so, but she didn't ask. Some stories didn't need endings, just the chance to keep going. Torryn moved to a crate, pulling out a stack of protein packets, the kind that tasted like regret but kept you alive. "Dinner?" he asked, holding one up. Silra nodded, standing to take it, her shoulder brushing his as she passed. No flinch, no pullback, just a moment that felt normal, or as normal as Voryn got. They sat near the purifier, closer than they used to, eating in silence, the kind that wasn't heavy, just comfortable. Lyrian cooed again, louder now, and Silra's smile grew, a little less guarded. "You think about names?" Torryn asked after a while, his voice low, like he was stepping carefully. "Before her, I mean." Silra chewed slowly, thinking. "Voryn wanted a son, called him Star," she said. "Said it'd make him bold. I told him it'd make him a target." She paused, her eyes distant. "Never got to find out." Torryn nodded, no pity, just understanding. "Names carry weight," he said. Lyrian's a good one. Silra's eyes met his, steady, and for the first time she didn't look away, didn't feel like she had to. The bay's hum wrapped around them, the purifier's steady drone, the faint clatter of Lyrian's cloths as she kicked. Silra's hand moved, almost without thinking, tracing the Caliph Trust sign again, palm to pulse. Torrin noticed, his eyes flicking to it, then back to her. "You're stuck with us now," she said, her voice soft but firm. Torrin's grin was quick, warm. "Worst deal I ever made," he said, but his tone said otherwise. Silra laughed, a dry huff, and leaned back, her shoulders still closed to his. They weren't safe, not yet, but they were here, and Lyrian had a name now, a piece of the stars to carry her forward. That was enough for tonight. The wheel spun silently in the void, its gleaming torus a beacon of human ambition against the indifferent black of space. But inside, the air was thick with the kind of tension that could snap a steel cable. Lieutenant Kiera Voss stood in the command center, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on a holo display that flickered with error codes and warning lights. The station's water reclamation system was at 92% efficiency, which sounded good on paper but was a problem when you were orbiting a planet where every drop counted. The colonies on Kepler 22b were screaming for more, and the messages piling up in her inbox were getting less polite by the hour. She rubbed her temples, the gray streaks in her short black hair catching the light, a reminder that this job was aging her faster than any sun. Her comms unit buzzed, and she tapped it with a sigh. "Voss here," she said, her voice steady but laced with the kind of exhaustion that came from too many double shifts. "Lieutenant, we've got a problem in the science wing," came the voice of Dr. Ilara Chen, the station's lead scientist whose usual calm was fraying at the edges. "The artifact's acting up. Readings are spiking, and it's not responding to our containment protocols." Kiera's stomach tightened. The artifact, that damned slab of alien metal they'd pulled from a mining shaft 3 months ago. It was supposed to be a curiosity, a puzzle for Chen and her team to poke at while Kiera dealt with real problems like keeping the station from falling apart. But nothing out here was ever just a curiosity. "Define acting up," Kiera said, already moving toward the lift. "It's emitting energy pulses," Chen replied. "Low level but structured, like it's trying to communicate, and it's messing with our systems. We've got glitches in the lab's power grid." Kiera swore under her breath. Glitches were never just glitches on the wheel. "I'm on my way," she said, stepping into the lift. The command center was a hive of activity, officers scrambling to manage the latest crisis, but she tuned it out, her mind racing. The artifact was trouble. She'd known that from the start, but she'd hoped it would stay dormant long enough for her to deal with the colony's demands. No such luck. The lift doors opened to the science wing, a sterile maze of white walls and humming equipment. Chen was waiting, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. "Over here," she said, leading Kiera to a containment chamber where the artifact sat under a web of sensors. It was a slab of smooth, metallic material, etched with symbols that looked like they'd been carved by something that didn't think like humans. It glowed faintly, a pulsing blue-green that made Kiera's skin prickle. "What am I looking at?" she asked, her tone clipped. Chen pointed to a screen displaying a graph of jagged peaks. "These pulses started an hour ago. They're not random. There's a pattern, almost like a signal, and it's interfering with our systems. The lab's power grid is fluctuating, and I'm getting reports of similar issues in the water reclamation system." Kiera's eyes narrowed. "You're saying this thing's screwing with our water supply?" Chen hesitated. "Not directly, but the timing's suspicious. The pulses are strong enough to disrupt nearby electronics. If it's affecting the reclamation system, it could explain the shortages the colonies are complaining about." Kiera didn't like where this was going. The colonies were already on edge, and if they thought the wheel was holding back water because of some alien relic, things would get ugly fast. "Can you shut it down?" she asked. Chen shook her head. "Not without risking a feedback surge. This thing's got more power than it should. We need to isolate it, but that'll take time." Time was something Kiera didn't have. Her comms buzzed again, this time with Ensign Rao's voice, high-pitched and urgent. "Lieutenant, we've got a delegation from the colonies docking in Bay 7. They're demanding a meeting, and Captain Hargrove's with them." Kiera's jaw clenched. Hargrove. The man was like a splinter you couldn't dig out, always showing up when trouble was brewing. "Tell them I'll be there in 10, she said, cutting the call. She turned to Chen. Lock this thing down as best you can. No one touches it until I say. And keep me posted on those pulses." Chen nodded, already turning back to her console. Kiera headed for Bay 7, her mind a storm of questions. The artifact, the water shortages, Hargrove's sudden appearance, it was all connected. She could feel it, but the pieces weren't fitting together yet. The docking bay was a chaotic mess when she arrived, the air thick with shouted accusations and the metallic tang of recycled air. The delegation was a mix of colony leaders and corporate types, their faces a gallery of anger and suspicion. Administrator Lin stood at the front, her wiry frame practically vibrating with rage. Marcus Tate, the mining corp rep, lounged nearby, his expensive cologne a sharp contrast to the station's utilitarian grit. And there in the center was Captain Hargrove, his uniform crisp, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Lieutenant Voss," he said, his voice smooth as always. "Just the person we need to sort this out." Kiera didn't trust that smile for a second. "What's the issue?" she asked, her tone flat, her eyes scanning the group. Lynn stepped forward, her scowl deepening. "The issue is your station starving us. The water deliveries are short and our people are suffering. We want answers and we want them now." Kiera kept her expression neutral, though her patience was fraying. "The reclamation system's running at 92%. You're getting what we can send. If there's a shortfall, it's not on our end." Tate snorted, his voice dripping with disdain. "That's a convenient excuse. We've got data showing water's being diverted to the mining rigs. Care to explain that, Captain?" He aimed the last word at Hargrove, who raised an eyebrow but didn't take the bait. "Let's keep this civil," Hargrove said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "The wheel's doing its best, I'm sure, but the colonies have a point. Trust is fraying, Lieutenant. People are starting to think you're hoarding resources." Kiera's fists clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "We're not hoarding anything. I'll have my team run a full diagnostic on the reclamation system. If there's a diversion, we'll find it." Lynn didn't look convinced, but she nodded, her eyes still burning. Hargrove's smile widened and Kiera wanted to wipe it off his face. He was enjoying this too much, stirring the pot while she scrambled to keep the station from boiling over. "Ensign Rao," she said into her comms, "get a team on the reclamation logs. I want a report in an hour." Rao's voice came back, nervous but eager. "On it, ma'am." Kiera turned back to the delegation. "You'll have your answers, but I need you to keep your people calm. Riots won't fix this." Lynn muttered something under her breath, but the group dispersed, leaving Kiera alone with Hargrove. He leaned in, his voice low. "You're in over your head, Voss. This station's a powder keg, and you're not the only one holding a match." She met his gaze, her voice cold. "If you've got something to say, Hargrove, spit it out." He chuckled, stepping back. "Just a friendly warning. Not everyone on your crew is as loyal as you think." The words hit like a punch, but Kiera didn't flinch. She watched him saunter off, her mind racing. Loyalty was a fragile thing on the wheel, and Hargrove knew it. She'd handpicked her crew, but after the sabotage 6 months ago, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her comms buzzed again, Chen's voice cutting through. "Lieutenant, the artifact's pulses are getting stronger, and we're picking up something else, a data spike in the lower levels near the core processors." Kiera's heart sank. The lower levels, of course. The one place on the station where you could hide a dozen problems and no one would notice. "I'm heading there now," she said, already moving. "Get a security team to meet me." She called Morales next, her voice sharp. "Chief, grab your toolkit and meet me at the core processors. We've got a situation." Morales didn't ask questions, just grunted in acknowledgement. Kiera took the lift down, her mind piecing together the puzzle. The artifact, the water shortages, the data spike, Hargrove's cryptic warnings, it was all converging, and she had a bad feeling the station was about to get a lot less stable. The lift doors opened to the lower levels, and the air hit her like a slap, cold and heavy with the smell of metal and decay. She drew her sidearm, her senses on high alert. Whatever was down here, it wasn't just a glitch. It was a threat, and Kiera Voss wasn't about to let it win. The station hummed with the low thrum of machinery, a constant pulse that felt like the heartbeat of a beast too big to ever truly sleep. Lieutenant Kiera Voss stood at the edge of the observation deck, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the swirling blue-green marble of Kepler 22b below. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, a lie of light and color that hid the chaos of its surface. She'd seen the reports, colonists clawing at each other over land rights, rogue AIs in the mining rigs throwing errors like tantrums, and now the whispers of something older, something buried deep in the planet's crust that didn't belong. She didn't like it. Not one bit. Her reflection in the reinforced glass showed a woman who hadn't slept in days, her short-cropped black hair streaked with premature gray, her jaw set in a way that said she was chewing on problems too big for her pay grade. The comms unit in her ear buzzed, and she tapped it with a sigh. "Voss here," she said, her voice clipped professional but with an edge that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "Lieutenant, we've got a situation in Bay 7, came the voice of Ensign Rao, her second in command, a kid who was too smart for his own good and too green to know it. "The delegates from the colony are here and they're not happy. Something about the water reclamation deal. Also, Captain Hargrove's with them." Kiera's stomach twisted. Hargrove, of course. The man had a knack for showing up when things were already going sideways, like a vulture with a nose for trouble. "On my way," she said, and turned from the window, her boots clanging against the metal deck as she strode toward the lift. The station, officially designated Orbital Command Kepler 22b, but called the Wheel by everyone who lived on it, was a marvel of engineering, a spinning torus of steel and composites that kept humanity's foothold in this system from falling apart. But it was also a pressure cooker, a place where every decision felt like it could tip the balance toward disaster. Kiera had been stationed here for 18 months, and she'd already seen 2 riots, a near mutiny, and a sabotage attempt that almost vented half the crew into space. She wasn't sure if she was good at her job or just lucky to still be alive. The lift doors hissed open, and she stepped into the chaos of Bay 7. The delegates, a mix of colony leaders and corporate suits, were clustered around a holo table, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations. Hargrove stood at the center, his uniform pristine, his smile as sharp as a knife. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that could charm a snake or scare it into submission, depending on his mood. Right now, he looked like he was enjoying the mess a little too much. "Lieutenant Voss," he said, spotting her approach, his voice smooth as polished steel. "So good of you to join us." Kiera didn't take the bait. "What's the problem, Captain?" she asked, her tone flat, her eyes scanning the room. The delegates were a mixed bag. Administrator Lynn, a wiry woman with a permanent scowl, Marcus Tate, the mining corp rep who always smelled faintly of expensive cologne, and a handful of others she vaguely recognized from briefings. They all looked pissed, but that was nothing new. "The problem," Lynn snapped, stepping forward, "is that your water reclamation plan is a sham. The colonies are getting half the output promised, and our people are rationing while your station sits pretty." Kiera raised an eyebrow. "The reclamation system's running at 92% efficiency. If you're short, it's not on us. Maybe check your distribution network." Lynn's face reddened, but before she could retort, Hargrove raised a hand. Now, let's not point fingers," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "The issue isn't just water, it's trust. The colonies feel neglected, Lieutenant. They think the Wheel's hoarding resources." Kiera bit back a curse. This was Hargrove's game, stirring the pot to make himself look like the reasonable one. She glanced at Rao, who was hovering near the holo table, his eyes wide like he was watching a bomb tick down. "Ensign, pull up the reclamation logs," she said. "Let's see the numbers." Rao nodded, his fingers flying over the console. The holo table flickered, displaying a stream of data: water output, filtration rates, delivery schedules. Kiera scanned it, her mind racing. The numbers checked out. The station was delivering what it promised, so why the shortfall? "This is pointless," Tate cut in, his voice dripping with corporate disdain. "We know the system's rigged. We've got reports of water being diverted to the mining rigs." "Your rigs, Captain Hargrove." Hargrove's smile didn't waver, but Kiera saw the flash in his eyes, a glint of something dangerous. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Tate," he said. "Care to back it up?" Kiera stepped between them, her patience fraying. "Enough. If there's a diversion, we'll find it. Rao, run a diagnostic on the rig feeds, now." Rao nodded, already diving into the system. The delegates muttered, their anger simmering but temporarily checked. Kiera turned to Hargrove, lowering her voice. "If you're playing games with the water, Captain, I will find out." Hargrove chuckled, a sound that made her skin crawl. "Lieutenant, I'm an open book, but you might want to look closer to home. Not everyone on your crew is as loyal as you think." The words hit like a punch. Kiera's mind flashed to the sabotage attempt 6 months ago, the one that had nearly killed her team. They'd never found the culprit, but the suspicion had lingered, a poison in the air. She wanted to press Hargrove to demand answers, but the delegates were watching and she couldn't afford to look weak. "We'll handle it," she said, her voice cold. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a station to run." She turned away, signaling Rao to follow. The ensign fell into step beside her, his face pale. "Ma'am, the diagnostic's running, but it'll take a few hours," he said. "Also, I found something weird in the logs. There's a data spike from the lower levels near the core processors. Could be nothing, but—" Kiera's gut twisted again. The core processors controlled everything. Life support, comms, even the station's orbit. A spike there wasn't nothing. It was a problem, and problems on the wheel had a way of turning deadly. "Get a team down there," she said, discreetly, "and keep an eye on Hargrove. He's up to something." Rao nodded, scurrying off to obey. Kiera headed for the command center, her mind churning. Hargrove's warning about loyalty gnawed at her. She'd handpicked her crew, but trust was a fragile thing out here, where every mistake could be your last. The command center was a hive of activity, screens glowing with data, officers barking orders. Kiera slid into her chair, pulling up the station's schematics. The lower levels were a labyrinth of maintenance tunnels and outdated systems, a perfect place to hide something, or someone. She tapped her comms. "Chief Morales, report to command. Bring your toolkit." Morales was her best engineer, a gruff woman who could fix anything from a busted airlock to a fried AI core. If there was something wrong down there, Morales would find it. 10 minutes later, Morales stood before her, wiping grease from her hands. "What's up, boss?" she asked, her voice rough but steady. Kiera briefed her quickly, keeping her voice low. "I need you to check the core processors, look for anything out of place, and Morales, don't trust anyone you don't know." Morales raised an eyebrow but nodded, on it. As she left, Kiera's comms buzzed again. This time it was Dr. Ilara Chen, the station's lead scientist. "Lieutenant, you need to see this," Chen said, her voice tight with urgency. "It's about the artifact." Kiera's heart sank. The artifact. They'd found it 3 months ago, buried in a mining shaft on Kepler 22b, a slab of unknown material etched with symbols no one could decipher. Chen had been obsessed with it, convinced it was alien, but Kiera had bigger problems than chasing xenoarchaeological dreams. "What now?" she asked, already dreading the answer. "It's active," Chen said. "The readings are off the charts. It's communicating." Kiera froze. Communicating? That was impossible, or it should have been. But out here on the edge of known space, impossible was just another Tuesday. "I'm coming to the lab," she said, and cut the call. As she headed for the science wing, her mind raced. Water shortages, rogue AIs, Hargrove's games, and now an alien artifact waking up. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a crisis, and Kiera had a sinking feeling it was all connected. The science wing was quieter than the command center, but the air was thick with tension. Chen was hunched over a console, her dark eyes fixed on a screen displaying jagged energy spikes. The artifact sat in a containment field, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. "Talk to me, Doc," Kiera said, stepping closer. Chen didn't look up. "It's emitting a signal, low frequency but structured, like a language. I've run it through every decoder we have, but it's not matching anything in our database." Kiera stared at the artifact, a chill running down her spine. Could it be a malfunction, something from the mining rigs interfering? Chen shook her head. "No, this is deliberate, and it's getting stronger." Before Kiera could respond, the lights flickered and an alarm blared. Her comms exploded with chatter. "Lieutenant, we've got a breach in the lower levels." Rao's voice panicked. "Something's overriding the core processors." Kiera swore, her mind snapping into overdrive. "Chen, lock down the artifact. No one touches it. Rao, seal the lower levels and get me a security team. Now." She ran for the lift, her pulse pounding. Hargrove's words echoed in her head. "Not everyone on your crew is as loyal as you think." The pieces were falling into place, and she didn't like the picture they formed. Someone or something was playing a dangerous game, and the wheel was the board. As the lift descended, Kiera checked her sidearm, the weight of it a small comfort. Whatever was waiting in the lower levels, she was ready. Or as ready as anyone could be when the universe decided to throw a curveball. The lift rattled as it plunged into the bowels of the wheel, the air growing colder and heavier with each passing second. Lieutenant Kiera Voss gripped her sidearm, her knuckles white, her mind racing through a dozen scenarios, none of them good. The alarm's wail had faded to a distant pulse, but the urgency in her comms was a constant buzz, like a swarm of angry insects. Rao's voice crackled through. his usual nervous energy now edged with outright fear. Lieutenant, security teams en route but the override's spreading. Core processors are locked out and we're losing control of the lower levels. It's like the system's fighting us. Kiera's jaw tightened. Keep trying, Ensign. Find me a backdoor and tell Morales to hustle. She cut the call, her eyes flicking to the lift's display. Level 42. The core processors were buried deep in a section of the station most of the crew avoided. It was a maze of outdated conduits, flickering lights and machinery that hadn't been serviced since the station was commissioned. Perfect place for something to go wrong, or for someone to make it go wrong. The lift doors hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that smelled of ozone and rust. Kiera stepped out, her boots echoing in the silence. The air was thick with the hum of machinery, but there was something else, a low thrum that felt wrong, like a heartbeat out of sync. She moved forward, her weapon raised, her senses on high alert. The schematics she'd memorized told her the processor hub was 3 junctions down, but the station felt alive in a way it shouldn't, the walls almost pulsing with intent. Her comms buzzed again. This time it was Chief Morales, her voice rough but steady. "Voss, I'm at the hub. You need to see this. Someone's been here and they left a mess." Kiera double-timed it, her boots pounding the deck. She rounded the final corner and found Morales crouched beside an access panel, her toolkit spread out like a surgeon's instruments. The hub was a cavernous space, lined with towering server racks that glowed with faint blue lights. Cables snaked across the floor, some severed, others spliced with makeshift connectors that looked like they'd been rigged in a hurry. "What the hell happened here?" Kiera asked, holstering her sidearm but keeping her hand close. Morales didn't look up, her hands busy probing a bundle of wires. Sabotage, but not the amateur kind. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They've rerouted the processor controls to an external node. We're locked out and the system's running on someone else's orders. Kiera's stomach churned. Sabotage, again. The word tasted like bile, bringing back memories of the airlock incident, the one that had nearly vented her team into the void. "Can you trace it?" she asked. Morales grunted, pulling a diagnostic tablet from her kit. "Working on it, but there's something else. These cables, they're not just rerouted. They're hooked into something that's not part of the station's original design. Something weird." Kiera knelt beside her, peering at the tablet's screen. It showed a schematic of the hub with a pulsing red line indicating an unauthorized connection. The line led to a section of the lower levels marked as decommissioned, a dead zone no one had bothered with in years. "That's not possible," Kiera muttered. "That area's sealed. No power, no access." Morales gave her a look, one that said she'd seen too much weird shit to believe in impossible. Someone got in, and they brought their own toys. Before Kiera could respond, the lights flickered and the thrum in the air grew louder, more insistent. Her comms crackled with Rao's voice. "Lieutenant, security teams pinned down 2 levels up. They're taking fire, small arms but organized, and the override spreading to life support." Kiera swore under her breath. This wasn't just sabotage. This was a coordinated attack. "Rao, hold the line. Reinforcements are on the way. Morales, you with me?" Morales nodded, grabbing her toolkit and a crowbar for good measure. "Lead the way, boss." They moved toward the decommissioned section, Kiera's mind racing. Hargrove's warning about loyalty echoed in her head, but she pushed it aside. Morales was solid, one of the few people she trusted without question. But the rest of the crew, the delegates, Hargrove himself, too many variables and not enough time. The corridor to the dead zone was sealed with a heavy blast door, its surface scarred from years of neglect. Kiera punched in an override code, half expecting it to fail, but the door groaned and slid open, revealing a dark, cavernous space beyond. The air was stale, thick with dust, and the thrum was louder here, almost deafening. She switched on her wrist light, the beam cutting through the gloom. The space was a graveyard of old equipment, crates stacked haphazardly, and pipes that dripped with condensation. But in the center, illuminated by a faint, unnatural glow, was something that didn't belong. A device sleek and metallic, its surface etched with the same symbols as the artifact in Chen's lab. It was connected to a tangle of cables that snaked into the station's systems, pulsing with energy. "What the hell is that?" Morales whispered, her voice tight. Kiera didn't answer. She didn't have to. It was the source of the override, the heart of whatever was happening. She approached cautiously, her hand on her sidearm. The device hummed, its glow intensifying, and for a moment she swore she heard a voice, not through her comms but in her head, a low murmur that felt like it was trying to crawl inside her thoughts. She shook it off, focusing on the task. "Morales, can you disable it?" Morales stepped forward, her tablet already scanning. "Maybe, but this thing's got defenses. I try to cut it off, it might fry the whole system." Kiera's comms buzzed again, this time with Chen's voice frantic. "Lieutenant, the artifact signal just spiked. It's syncing with something in the lower levels. If we don't stop it, it could take over the entire station." Kiera's blood ran cold. The artifact, the device. They were connected and someone had set this up, planned it. Chen locked down the lab, no one in or out. "Morales, we need to shut this thing down now." Morales nodded, her hands moving fast, but before she could make progress, the room shook and a new alarm blared. Kiera's comms exploded with chatter. "Lieutenant, intruders in the lower levels," Rao shouted. "They are armed and they're heading your way." Kiera drew her sidearm, motioning for Morales to take cover. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, and then they emerged. 3 figures in tactical gear, faces obscured by visors, moving with military precision. They carried rifles, not standard issue, and their movements were too smooth, too coordinated. "Drop your weapon." One of them barked, his voice distorted by a modulator. Kiera didn't comply. She fired, the shot echoing in the confined space, but the figure dodged with inhuman speed, returning fire. She dove behind a crate, her heart pounding. Morales was already moving, swinging her crowbar at the nearest intruder, who staggered but didn't fall. "Morales, get that device offline." Kiera shouted, firing again to draw their attention. The intruders were fast, too fast, and their weapons packed a punch. One shot grazed her shoulder, burning through her uniform, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. The thrum from the device was now a roar, and the voice in her head was louder, whispering words she couldn't understand but felt like a warning. Morales reached the device, her hands a blur as she worked. "Almost there," she yelled, but one of the intruders turned, raising his rifle. Kiera didn't think. She tackled him, the impact jarring her bones, and they hit the deck hard. The other 2 were on her in an instant, but she fought like a cornered animal, her training kicking in. A knee to the groin, an elbow to the throat, and one went down, gasping. The second grabbed her arm, twisting, but she drove her heel into his knee, hearing a satisfying crunch. Morales shouted, "Got it!" And the device's glow flickered, then died. The thrum stopped, and the voice in Kiera's head went silent. The remaining intruder hesitated, then retreated, vanishing into the shadows. Kiera staggered to her feet, her shoulder burning, her breath ragged. "Status!" she barked. Morales was panting, her hands still on the device. "It's offline, but the system's still compromised. We need to get to the main hub to regain control." Kiera nodded, her mind spinning. The intruders, the device, the artifact, it was all connected, and Hargrove's smug face loomed in her thoughts. Was he behind this? Or was he just a piece in someone else's game? "Let's move," she said, helping Morales up. They ran for the hub, the alarm still blaring, the station teetering on the edge of chaos. Kiera didn't know who she could trust, but she knew one thing. The wheel was her responsibility, and she wasn't going to let it fall. Not today, not ever. The corridors of the wheel were a blur as Lieutenant Kiera Voss and Chief Morales sprinted toward the main processor hub, their boots pounding against the metal deck. The alarms a relentless scream in the background. Kiera's shoulder burned where the intruder's shot had grazed her, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay, sharpening her focus to a razor's edge. The station was unraveling, systems failing like dominoes, and the device they'd just disabled was only part of the problem. Someone or something was still pulling strings, and Kiera was running out of time to figure out who. Morales, clutching her toolkit like a lifeline, kept pace, her face grim but determined. "If we don't get control of the hub soon, we're looking at total system failure," she said, her voice rough from exertion. "Life support's already flickering. We've got maybe an hour before this place becomes a coffin." Kiera didn't respond, her mind churning through the chaos. The intruders in the lower levels, the alien device, the artifact in Chen's lab, all of it screamed conspiracy, and Captain Hargrove's name kept floating to the top of her list. His smug warning about loyalty was a splinter under her skin, impossible to ignore. But she couldn't afford to chase hunches, not with the station teetering on the brink. Her comms buzzed, Ensign Rao's voice cutting through the static. "Lieutenant, security's holding the upper levels, but we've got reports of more intruders near the hub. They're not ours. And Hargrove's gone dark. No one's seen him since Bay 7. Kiera's gut twisted. Of course Hargrove was missing. Rao locked down the command center. "No one in or out until I say, and keep trying to break that override." She cut the call, glancing at Morales. "You ready for a fight?" Morales hefted her crowbar, a glint in her eye. "Born ready, boss." They reached the hub's entrance, a massive reinforced door that looked like it could withstand a meteor strike. Kiera punched in her override code, but the panel flashed red, denying access. "Son of a bitch," she muttered, slamming her fist against it. Morales didn't hesitate, kneeling to pry open the panel's casing. "Give me 2 minutes," she said, her hands already working, tools flashing in the dim light. Kiera stood guard, her sidearm drawn, her eyes scanning the corridor. The air was thick with tension. The station's hum now, a discordant whine that set her teeth on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the shadows held more than just dust and rust. A faint clatter echoed from the corridor's end, and she snapped her weapon up, her heart pounding. "Morales, hurry," she hissed. Almost there, Morales grunted, her fingers deftly rerouting circuits. The panel beeped and the door groaned open, revealing the hub's interior, a cavern of blinking lights and tangled cables. But it wasn't empty. 3 figures stood near the central console, their silhouettes sharp against the glow of the screens. They weren't in tactical gear like the intruders below, but their movements were just as precise, just as wrong. Kiera's instincts screamed trap, but she didn't have a choice. "Hands up," she barked, stepping inside, her weapon trained on the nearest figure. They turned, and her breath caught. Their faces were obscured not by visors but by smooth, featureless masks that gleamed like polished obsidian. No eyes, no mouths, just a blank expanse that made her skin crawl. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded. The figures didn't answer. Instead, they moved fast and silent, spreading out to flank her. Morales was on her feet now, crowbar raised, but Kiera waved her back. "Get to the console. I'll handle this." Morales hesitated, then nodded, diving for the console as Kiera fired a warning shot. The bullet sparked off the floor, but the figures didn't flinch, their movements fluid, almost mechanical. One lunged, a blade flashing in its hand, and Kiera dodged, the blade grazing her already wounded shoulder. Pain flared, but she gritted her teeth, grabbing the figure's arm and twisting, using its momentum to throw it into a server rack. The crash was loud, but the figure was up in an instant, unfazed. These weren't people. Not entirely. Kiera fought to keep the other 2 at bay, her shots precise but less effective than she'd hoped. The figures absorbed the hits, their masks unmarred, their movements relentless. Morales was at the console, her tablet plugged in, her voice urgent. "I'm in, but the override's deep. It's not just code, it's like the system's been rewritten from the inside." Kiera ducked a swing from the second figure, landing a kick that sent it staggering. "Can you fix it?" she shouted, her breath ragged. "Trying." Morales yelled back. "But this isn't human tech. It's got the same signature as that device downstairs." Kiera's mind raced. The device, the artifact, the masked figures, it was all connected, and it was bigger than Hargrove, bigger than the wheel. She fired again, aiming for the joints of the nearest figure, and this time it stumbled, a faint crack appearing in its mask. Progress. But before she could press the advantage, her comms buzzed with Chen's voice, panicked. "Lieutenant, the artifact's gone critical. It's emitting a signal that's syncing with the station's core. If we don't stop it, it'll take everything offline. Permanently, Kiera swore, dodging another blade. Chen, can you shut it down? I'm trying, but it's fighting back. It's like it's alive. Chen's voice broke and the line went dead. Kiera's heart sank. The artifact was the key, but she was stuck here, fighting shadows. She glanced at Morales, who was sweating, her fingers flying across the console. Morales, talk to me. I've got partial control, Morales said, her voice strained. But the core's still locked. I need more time. Time they didn't have. The figures were closing in, their movements tighter, more coordinated. Kiera's shoulders screamed, her vision blurring at the edges, but she fought on, her training the only thing keeping her upright. She landed a shot on the second figure's mask, and it shattered, revealing not a face but a lattice of circuits and glowing filaments. Not human, not even close. Morales, we've got a bigger problem, Kiera said, backing toward the console. These things aren't people, they are machines. Morales glanced up, her eyes widening, like the artifact. Maybe, Kiera said, firing again, or they're working for it. The third figure lunged and Kiera barely dodged, the blade slicing her sleeve. She grabbed a loose cable from the floor, wrapping it around the figure's arm and yanking, pulling it off balance. It stumbled and she drove her knee into its chest, hearing a satisfying crunch. But the first figure was back. Its mask cracked but functional, and it was faster now, angrier. Kiera's comms buzzed again, this time with Rao. Lieutenant, we've got Hargrove. He's in the command center and he's trying to access the core. Kiera's blood ran cold. Hargrove, of course. Rao, stop him. Use force if you have to. She cut the call, focusing on the fight. Morales shouted, I've got it. Core's back online, but the override's still active. I need to physically disconnect the link. Kiera nodded, her eyes on the figures. Do it. I'll cover you. Morales dove for a panel beneath the console, ripping it open and yanking at cables. The figures seemed to sense the shift, their movements growing frantic. Kiera fired, her shots wild but enough to keep them at bay. The hum in the air was deafening now, the station trembling as if it were fighting to stay alive. Morales yanked a final cable and the lights stabilized, the hum fading to a low drone. Done! She shouted, but before Kiera could celebrate, the third figure tackled her, pinning her to the ground. Its mask was inches from her face, its surface pulsing with faint light. For a moment she swore she saw something behind it, not circuits but intent, a mind that wasn't human but wasn't machine either. She drove her fist into the crack in its mask, and it shattered, the figure collapsing in a shower of sparks. Kiera scrambled to her feet, helping Morales up. We need to get to the command center, she said, her voice hoarse. Hargrove's making his move. They ran, the station's corridors a blur of flashing lights and blaring alarms. Kiera's mind was a storm of questions. Who were the figures? What was the artifact? And what the hell was Hargrove playing at? They reached the command center, finding it in chaos. Rao stood over Hargrove, who was slumped against a console, his hands cuffed, his face bloodied but still smirking. Lieutenant, he said, his voice smooth despite the bruise on his jaw. You're late to the party. Era ignored him, checking the console. The core was back online, but the artifact's signal was still active, weaker but persistent. Rao, get Chen on the line. We need to kill that signal. Rao nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. Hargrove chuckled, the sound grating. You're fighting a losing battle, Voss. The artifact's not just a thing, it's a door, and someone's already knocking. Kiera rounded on him, her patience gone. Who's behind this, Hargrove? Talk, or I swear I'll vent you myself. His smile widened, but before he could answer, the station shook, a deep rumble that felt like the universe itself was cracking open. Chen's voice came through, frantic. Lieutenant, the artifact's activating something. It's not just the station, it's the planet. Kiera's heart stopped. The planet. Kepler 22b. Whatever was down there, it was waking up, and the wheel was just the beginning.